"You're the last good cowboy left," said the Comanche widow after he refused the bounty on her. The envelope sat on the corner of Amos Greer's desk like something dead. I didn't touch it right away. I set my coffee down beside it and looked at it the way you look at a coiled snake. Not because you're afraid, but because you've seen what happens when you're not careful. The paper was government issue, stiff and pale, and someone had written my name on the front, in that cramped, authoritative hand that says the writer believes his words settle things. Amos had pushed it across the desk without a word and gone back to counting the cash in his drawer, which was his way of telling me the conversation was over before it started. I was 58 years old that autumn. My left knee ached in the cold. I had $17 saved, a horse that was sounder than I deserved, and a reputation that had outlasted the usefulness of it. I'd been a deputy marshal for 11 years before the federal government decided they didn't need men like me anymore. Men who'd grown up learning the country instead of reading it on a map. They wanted younger men, educated men, men who wrote reports in triplicate. I didn't fight it. I took my horse and my rifle, and I came to Greer's office in Plainfield, because Amos had been a friend once, and he ran a bounty operation out of the back of his land deed business, and he'd told me in a letter that there was always work. That was 4 months ago. I'd brought in 2 men since then, both alive, which was how I preferred it, and how the law required it, and the law's preference and mine had always been the same on that particular matter. I picked up the envelope. The bounty was for a woman, Comanche, the paperwork said, name given as Essa Taka, which I recognized as probably a version of something real. The federal men were loose with Comanche names, writing down whatever phonetic approximation came out when they asked, and didn't much care whether they'd heard it right. Age estimated at 35. Wanted for the murder of one Clement Doyle, rancher, Harmon County, found dead on his property 6 weeks prior. Bounty: $220, dead or alive, with a note at the bottom in smaller type. Subject considered dangerous. Exercise appropriate caution. $220 was more money than I'd seen in one place in 2 years. I folded the paper and put it in my coat pocket. Amos was still counting. I finished my coffee and walked out. I knew Harmon County. I'd ridden through it twice as a deputy, both times in summer when the grass was still green enough to make you think the land was kind. It wasn't. The soil was chalky and thin, and the ranchers who'd come in after the Comanche were cleared out had mostly broken themselves against it within a decade. The ones who'd survived had done it by grazing too hard and owing too much, and being the kind of men who believed that surviving was its own justification for how you'd done it. Clement Doyle had been one of those men. I'd heard his name over the years. Never met him. The version of his name I'd heard was not a friendly one. I rode for 3 days. The country opened up west of Enid in a way that always settled something in my chest. The sky took over, and the grass lay flat, and the wind had room to move without bouncing off anything. A man could see trouble coming from a long way off out here, which was both the comfort of it and the loneliness. I camped the second night on a creek that didn't have a name on any map I'd seen, and I lay in my bedroll listening to the water and thinking about the envelope in my coat pocket. I'd taken bounties on men before. I'd taken bounties on men who were probably guilty of worse than what they were charged with. And I'd taken bounties on men who were probably not guilty of much at all and had simply made someone with money angry. That was the nature of the work. You told yourself you were bringing them in for the court to decide, not deciding yourself, and that was true enough that you could sleep on it. Mostly. A woman was different. I'm not going to pretty that up. It was different in the way that finding a man's tracks in the dirt and finding a child's tracks in the dirt are different. Your gut reacts before your head catches up. And the reaction isn't always logic. But it isn't nothing either. I lay there a long time, looking at the sky. I found the Doyle place on the afternoon of the 3rd day, or what was left of it. The main house was standing, but the barn had burned not recently, maybe 2 months back from the char, and the corrals were empty, and the whole property had that feeling of a place that's been left. A Mexican family in a wagon had camped in the yard, and they told me, slowly, in pieces, that the Doyle ranch had been sold to a man from Dallas who hadn't come to look at it yet. Clement Doyle's 2 hands had both left after he died. There was nobody here who could tell me anything. I asked where Doyle had kept his Comanche workers. The woman in the wagon gave me a look. Her husband was very still. He didn't keep them, she said. He hired them. I know, I said. Where would they have camped? She pointed south. About 3 miles, she thought. There was a camp. 3 family groups, from what I could see when I came over the rise brush shelters and a couple of canvas pieces tied between posts, a fire going in the center of it. About 14 people, not counting the children. It was a poor camp. The kind that says the people in it have been moving and haven't stopped moving long enough to build anything better, or have learned not to build anything they'd have to leave. I came in slow and announced myself from a distance, which is what you do when you don't want to be shot. A man came out to meet me, old enough that he remembered a different time, and I told him I was looking for Essa Taka and I wasn't there to make trouble. He looked at me for a while. Then he turned and went back into the camp. She came out herself. I want to get this right, because I've thought about this moment a lot in the years since. What I saw first was how she walked. Not cautiously, not deferentially. She walked the way a person walks, when they've stopped being afraid of being seen, and decided that how they're seen is their own business. She was 35, maybe 36, lean, and weathered the way everyone out here was weathered. Her hair pulled back, and her eyes so direct it took me a second to hold them. She had a bruise on her jaw that was old enough to be fading. I noticed it the way I noticed other things, filed it, and kept going. She said, in English that was better than some white men I'd known, "I know why you're here." "All right," I said. "You have a paper with my name on it." "I do." She looked at my horse, then at me. "Are you going to use it?" I got down from the saddle. Not because I'd decided anything yet. I don't know exactly why I got down. Maybe because it seemed like a conversation worth having on the ground. "Tell me about Clement Doyle," I said. She didn't tell me right away. She made me wait, which I respected. And she made me coffee, which I took, and we sat at the edge of the camp, while the old man stood about 30 yards off watching me, with an expression that said he'd seen enough of what men like me did, that he wasn't going to pretend otherwise. Clement Doyle had hired Comanche workers for 3 seasons. He'd paid less than what he'd promised, and made up the difference by letting them camp on his land, which he then charged them for. There were debts written in a ledger that grew every season, and there was no way to work down a debt that kept being written up. When her husband, a man named Taka Johanna, had told Doyle the arrangement wasn't honest, Doyle had had him beaten by his 2 hands and told the family to clear off the land by the end of the month. Her husband had died of it. Not that night 3 weeks after, from something that had broken inside. He'd lasted long enough to see their younger child recover from a fever, which was what he'd been holding out for, she thought. She'd waited 2 months. Then she'd gone back to Doyle's place in the night. "Did you kill him?" I asked. She looked at me straight. "Yes." I sat with that. "He was alone," she said. "I came to his door. I told him the name of my husband. He didn't know it. He looked at me like I was..." She paused, and I could see her deciding how to finish it, like something that had wandered into his yard. She stopped there. She didn't tell me what had happened exactly, and I didn't ask. I knew enough. I pulled the envelope out of my coat pocket. I held it for a moment, turning it over. Then I leaned forward and pushed it into the fire. She watched it catch. She didn't say anything. I didn't say anything. We watched it burn down to nothing, and then the wind took the ash. That should have been the end of it. I got back on my horse, and I rode away from that camp, and for about 2 miles I felt like I'd done the right thing, and also like a man who'd just thrown $220 into a fire, which was both of those things simultaneously. I got to the creek I'd camped on the night before, and I stopped. I sat on my horse, in the middle of the creek crossing, and I thought about Amos Greer and his desk, and the next envelope that would be on it. And I thought about $17 and a bad knee, and a horse that was sounder than I deserved. And I thought about what it was I was riding back to. I turned the horse around. I don't know what I was planning. I'm not sure I was planning anything. That's not how it works. You don't plan it. You just find yourself turned around and riding back. And then you figure out what you meant by it. They were breaking camp. Not because of me, or not only because of me. The old man had decided, or she had decided, or they'd all decided together, that staying near the Doyle land was no longer safe now that someone had found them. The brush shelters were already down. The children were being settled into the bed of a wagon, with the kind of practiced quiet that says, a family has done this before, packed up fast in the dark, hasn't stopped having to do it. She saw me come back across the flat and she stood still and watched me ride up. You came back, she said. I noticed. I said. Why? I thought about that. Where are you going? North, she said. There is family in the territory. That's 300 miles. I know how far it is. I looked at the wagon, at the children, at the old man who was still watching me with that expression. I looked at the camp, which was down to canvas and coals now. It was almost dark and the temperature was dropping, and they were going to travel in the night to put distance between themselves and whatever was coming behind them. You'll need someone who knows the country, I said. She looked at me for a long time. I couldn't read all of it. I know the country, she said. I know you do, I said. But the men who'll come next won't care about that. Another silence. The old man said something in Comanche. She answered him without looking away from me. He made a sound that might have been a laugh, or might have been something else. You burned the paper, she said. Yes, that was $220. I'm aware. She looked at me differently then. Not softly, it wasn't soft. It was the way you look at something you're deciding whether to trust, and the deciding is real, not ceremonial. Her jaw was set. The fading bruise caught the firelight. All right, she said. We traveled at night for the first 4 days, and rested through the heat of the day. I knew the country north of Harmon, knew it well enough to find the draws and the dry creek beds that don't show on maps and keep you out of sight of the main trail. There were 5 adults besides me and 4 children, and the old man, whose name I never got right. He let me call him something that wasn't quite his name, and seemed amused by my effort, which I chose to take as goodwill. She rode beside me most of those nights. Sometimes we talked, and sometimes we didn't. She told me about her husband in pieces, the way you tell things you're still carrying, not in order, not a story, just the pieces that surface. He'd been a good rider. He'd been patient with the children in the way that impatient men are sometimes patient with children, like they've found the one thing that pulls them out of themselves. He'd made her laugh. I didn't say much back. I wasn't sure what was mine to say. What I remember most from those nights is the sound of the wagon wheels, and the horses breathing, and the way the country smelled at 2 in the morning, cold and sage and something mineral underneath. The smell of the earth just being itself, with nobody asking anything of it. And her voice, low and even, telling me things. On the 3rd night she asked me about myself. I told her the deputy work, the 11 years. She listened and didn't fill the silences the way people do when they're uncomfortable with them, which I appreciated. What did you do before that? She asked. Ranched. For a while. What happened to it? Bad year, I said. Then another bad year. She was quiet for a moment. You've been alone a long time. It wasn't a question. I didn't argue with it. On the 5th day we hit trouble. I'd known it was possible. Amos Greer hadn't put just my name on the list. Bounty work doesn't work that way. And a $220 bounty would have gone to at least 3 or 4 men. I'd just hoped we'd make enough distance. We didn't quite. There were 2 of them, waiting in the notch where the trail went through a sandstone cut. I saw them at about 400 yards. Just their horses at first, then the men, and I knew what they were before I could see their faces. I'd been that shape myself enough times that I recognized it. Waiting shapes. Patient shapes. Men who've picked their spot and settled into it. I told the wagon to stop. Take the north draw, I told her. I'd shown it to her the day before. A narrow cut that went around the sandstone and came out half a mile up. Don't wait. She looked at the notch. Then at me. How many? She said. 2 that I can see. She looked at me with something I couldn't entirely read. This isn't your trouble, she said. No, I agreed. She held my eyes for a moment. Then she said something to the old man, and turned to help get the wagon moving toward the draw. I rode toward the notch. The first man's name was Gilles, or that's what he went by. I'd heard of him. He'd done bounty work in the territory for 6 or 7 years, and he was competent at it, and not particular about the manner of collection. He called out to me from about 150 yards. "Hargrove, you picking up my work, or I picking up yours?" "Neither," I said. "That paper's still good," he said. "Woman killed a white man. I intend to collect." "Paper burned," I said. "She's not a wanted person." He looked at me for a while. His partner was working around to my right, not carefully enough. "Papers don't burn, Hargrove. The crime doesn't burn with them. There are courts for crimes," I said. "And I'm not in a habit of debating Comanche women to bounty men in a notch." "You sweet on her?" I didn't answer that. "Thing is," Gilles said, "you burned your paper, but I've still got mine. So really, this is a question of whose day is going to go well." "Yours could," I said. "Ride south. I'll not say anything about it." He thought about that for a moment. His partner had stopped working around to my right, which meant he'd gotten where he was going. I didn't look at where that was, because the moment you look, you telegraph that you know, and the moment he knows you know is the moment it starts. "Can't do that," Gilles said. $220 is money." "It is," I said. "What happened next took about 6 seconds, and I'm not going to give you the inventory of it." When it was over, Gilles was on the ground with a crease in his arm that hurt but wouldn't kill him, and his partner was sitting in the dirt holding his shoulder, and I had a cut on my left hand from the saddle ring that I hadn't noticed until it was over. My horse hadn't moved, which said something about that horse. I rode over to Gilles. He was angry, which was fair. "The woman's in the territory by now," I said. "Let it go." He said several things that I won't write down. I waited him out. "You're finished in this work," he said finally. "Greer'll hear. Everyone'll hear." "All right," I said. I rode north. I caught them in the draw, which meant they hadn't gone far. She was waiting on her horse at the top of the cut, where the country opened up again, and the wagon was stopped just beyond her. When I came through, she looked at my hand, then at my face. "You're bleeding," she said. "It's nothing. Let me see." I held out the hand. She took it without asking, turned it to see the cut. Her grip was firm, and her fingers were cold from the morning air. "It needs cleaning," she said. "Later," I said. "We should move." "Now," she said. I got down from the horse. She took water from the wagon and cleaned the cut there in the draw, wrapping it with a strip of cloth from somewhere in her pack, her hands working quickly and without waste. The old man watched from the wagon seat. One of the children peered over the side. I stood there and let her do it. When she was done, she held my hand for a moment longer, looking at it, and then she looked up at me. The sun was just coming over the rim of the country east of us, and the light was that early, clean, particular light that doesn't last long. Her face was level with mine. The fading bruise had almost gone. "Why are you doing this?" she said. Quiet. Meaning something different than she'd meant in camp. I thought about how to answer that. I thought about $17 and a bad knee, and what I was riding back to if I turned around. I thought about the envelope burning. I thought about her voice in the dark, telling me things. "I don't know exactly," I said. That was honest. She looked at me for a long time. She didn't look away. Then she said, "You're the last good cowboy left." She said it plainly, without decoration. The way you say a thing you've decided is true. Not a compliment. Something more solid than that. Something she'd worked out and was telling me. The way you tell a man something you want him to know about himself. I didn't say anything. I didn't know what to say back to that. She let go of my hand. She turned and got back on her horse. We rode north. I want to tell the rest of it simply, because that's how it was. We made the territory on the 9th day. There was family there, a cousin of her husband's, a settlement that wasn't large but was more than the camp had been built things. A corral, a fire, in a proper hearth. The children ran ahead of the wagon, and the old man was helped down by a young man I hadn't met, and there was the sound of people greeting each other, the particular sound of it, which is the same in any language. I stayed on my horse. I hadn't planned past getting them here. She came to me before I'd worked out what I was doing. "You're not leaving tonight," she said. Not a question. I hadn't thought about it. "You have nowhere to go," she said. Still not unkind, just plain. "That's somewhat true," I said. "Stay," she said. Rest the horse. There's room. I stayed 3 days. Then 4. Then it stopped being a question I was asking. I'm not going to dress up what grew between us. Because it grew the way things grow out here slowly, without ceremony, in the practical space between people who've been doing something hard together. It wasn't sudden. It wasn't spoken until it needed to be spoken. She was grieving and I was something else. Something harder to name, not grieving exactly. More like a man who'd been wearing the same coat so long he'd forgotten he was wearing it. She made me put it down. I don't know how she did that. She just did. She had her own grief, and she carried it the way she carried everything, straight and clear-eyed, and without asking anyone to make it lighter. I didn't try to make it lighter. I tried to be there while she carried it, which was what she needed, I think, and what I was capable of. The territory winter came hard. I helped with the work, which was the same work it always was. Out here. Wood, water, animals, the 1,000 ordinary tasks that keep people alive when the temperature drops below what a man from somewhere else would think was survivable. I was not a young man and my knee was not improving, and the old man, whose name I still couldn't say right, made it a point to show me every morning that he found this funny. I found it funny too. There is a moment I think about when I think about that winter. It was late January. The cold had set in deep, the kind of cold that makes the air feel like something solid, and we'd lost a horse to it 2 nights before, and everyone was tired and a little shorter with each other than usual. I'd been out to check the corral after supper, and I came back in, and she was sitting by the fire, mending something, just the lamp and the fire and the sound of the wind outside. She looked up when I came in. She said nothing. She just looked at me in the lamplight. This woman who had walked toward me across that poor camp, without deference and without fear, who had buried her husband and raised her children and survived things that would have finished most people I'd known, who had told me what I was, as plainly as she told me anything. She looked at me, and there was something in it that I hadn't felt in a long time. Not pity, not softness. Recognition. Like she was saying, again, without words, I see what you are. I see the worth of it. I sat down across from her. She handed me the end of what she was mending, and I held it while she worked, and the fire settled down, and the wind outside did what wind does, and that was enough. That was all of it, really. I'm telling this to you now, because you asked me what had changed. I'll tell you what changed. I was a man the territory had used up and set down. I'd done my work, and it had been good work, and at some point, the people who needed the work done decided they didn't need me to do it anymore. And I had walked out of that office in Plainfield with a horse and a rifle and $17, and the particular loneliness of a man who can't quite figure out what he is anymore when the thing he was is finished. She changed that. Not by telling me I was something I wasn't. By telling me I was something I was the last good cowboy left, she said. And she said it because she meant it. Because she'd watched me ride toward trouble on her behalf and burn a paper that was worth $220 and come back around without being asked. Because she'd watched me hold her hand out in the lamplight that first night and not make it into anything it wasn't. The worth of a man isn't always a loud thing. Out here, most of it's quiet. Most of it's in the doing, and the not doing, and the being there when the weather comes in hard. She saw it. That was the thing I hadn't had for a long time, and I hadn't known what the lack of it was doing to me until it was there again. My knee still aches in the cold. The horse is older. The old man's name I still can't say right, and he still thinks this is funnier than it needs to be. She's asleep in the next room. I'm going to go put the lamp out now. That's all.